The house was completely silent. There was no television on, no cars passing on the street, not even the sound of leaves moving. But then came the noise. First soft, almost imperceptible, then clearer. A slow, continuous, repeated scratch. Claws against wood. The sound seemed to be coming from the back door. The clock in the room showed exactly 3:17 in the morning. A sharp wind pushed the thin curtain of the window, letting the streetlight invade the room with a cold, bluish tone. She projected onto the ancient wooden floor the unmistakable silhouette of a small animal, standing still, motionless, looking inward. The figure had a feline shape. Body arched, tail motionless, ears raised. It didn't move. The sound of claws stopped, but something about that moment still sounded wrong. It was as if time had stopped. A solitary ticking echoed from the wall. Every second seemed longer than the last. The breathing of the man in the room above became heavier. He opened his eyes slowly, feeling his chest tighten. He didn't know the exact reason, but he had awakened, as if something was calling him. The silence in the house weighed like concrete. Slowly, he got up from the bed, his bare feet finding the cold floor. Each step was slow, attentive, as if not wanting to alert what was waiting on the other side of the door. When he reached the stairs, he stopped. The sound had returned, 3 short scratches, then 3 more. The wood responded as if it were alive. The wind outside picked up. The windows shook. Downstairs, the hallway seemed longer than usual. Darkness dominated everything. Only the dim light from the street offered some contour to the scene. When he finally reached the door, the man stopped. For a moment, he thought he saw 2 eyes shining in the dark. They didn't blink. They just stared. He didn't turn the handle. He stood there, static, listening to his own heart. There was something about that moment that wasn't new. It was an old feeling, family, a memory that he couldn't fully access. But it was there, latent, that presence, that sound. It wasn't the first time. Have you ever had the feeling that something or someone was watching you even without seeing anything? Comment below. The sun barely touched the horizon when Daniel walked down the stairs that morning. The first rays of light filtered through the old shutters, drawing streaks of dust, suspended in the air. The house, a silent inheritance from the parents, seemed frozen in time. Located on the east side of Rochester, New York, the Victorian home, with its hardwood floors creaking with every step, carried more than memories. It carried absences. The old furniture had been in the same places since adolescence. The fireplace, now just decorative, displayed faded photographs from a childhood that already seemed to belong to another life. Among them, an image in black and white with yellowed edges, Daniel at 6 years old, with his small hands resting on the back of a white cat, with attentive eyes and a calm expression. The constant smell of old wood and reheated coffee filled the room. It was always the same ritual. The water got hot, but the coffee got cold before it was finished. Books stacked in the room, pictures forgotten in the corners, curtains half open as if they were waiting for someone who would never return to enter through the door. Everything there seemed unfinished. Time didn't run, it just repeated. Daniel had lived alone since he was 27, when he lost his parents every few months. Since then, the days have blended into a sequence of automatic gestures, filled with long silences and fragmented memories. There were no conversations, just echoes. When I opened my bedroom window, I saw the same yard where I used to run barefoot, the same tree where he learned to climb, where he fell for the first time, where he buried his first bird. That house held more than history. He kept his version that he no longer knew where he had ended up. The neighbors barely saw him. Daniel didn't go to bars. He didn't receive visitors. He didn't celebrate birthdays. I worked remotely as an editorial illustrator, meeting deadlines, but letting the art lose its soul in the process. He couldn't remember the last time he had laughed without guilt, cried freely, or loved without fear. Life had become a sequence of working days that never ended. Among the dark rooms, there was one in particular that was rarely opened. My old childhood bedroom. The doorknob was still there, rusty. The door creaked at the slightest touch, and behind it, dusty boxes rested on the navy blue carpet, alongside old toys and frozen souvenirs. It was a place of silence within silence, where you entered not with your feet, but with your soul in pieces. That space wasn't just physical, it was emotional. It carried layers of memories that he didn't allow himself to touch. In the rare moments when he faced the mirror, Daniel saw a man who had forgotten what it was like to be seen. The eyes carried the density of someone waiting for something they couldn't name. It wasn't sadness, it was absence. And this absence lived in him like a discreet shadow, present in every lost look, in every untaken breath, in every swallowed word. He had forgotten what it was like to feel company. The next morning the cold was still in the air when Daniel opened the living room curtains. The winter light invaded the room with a pale, silent tone. It was at that moment that he noticed for the first time the strange presence on the balcony. A cat, small and thin, rested next to the doorframe, its eyes fixed on the inside of the house. The fur, although dirty and disheveled, still retained traces of an intense white, stained with earth and time. One of the flanks had a recent, slightly reddish scratch. The animal didn't meow, it didn't move. He just watched. No rush, no fear. As if he already knew exactly where he was, Daniel remained still for a few seconds, staring at that motionless figure. There was something about that look that bothered me. Not because it's threatening, but because it's too recognizable. He then pulled back the curtain and turned around, diverting his thoughts to something else. He tried to continue his day, ignoring the strange feeling that presence had left in the air. But when he returned to the room hours later, the cat was still there. Same place, same posture, staring at the same window, the one that looked into his old childhood bedroom, now locked for years. On the third day, the same scene. The cold porch, the cat motionless, its yellow eyes twinkling in the light filtered through the roof. The pattern began to become disturbing. The animal did not look for food, it did not shrink from the wind. I just sat, every day, in the exact same spot, as if expecting something or someone. Daniel tried to shake off the feeling of discomfort. He convinced himself that it was a coincidence, that cats appeared all the time in that region, but inside, a part of him knew he wasn't. Not exactly. The way the cat watched him brought a familiar discomfort, as if those eyes had already been present in another life, another time. There was a subtle memory in that stare that required no words, just silence. The days passed, and the animal showed no intention of leaving. It only changed its position when the sun changed angles. At night, it disappeared. In the morning, he reappeared in the same place. No neighbor recognized him, no collar, no sign of owner. A slight body, but with an imposing presence. An ordinary cat, but with something that made it look ancient. As if I had already lived longer than I should have, and even without understanding why, Daniel began to observe that behavior more closely. The way the animal slowly approached the door and sat down with millimeter precision in front of the window of the closed room. The way he never looked directly at Daniel but seemed to see through him, as if he saw what even he didn't allow himself to see. In the days that followed, the cat's presence became a fixed point in the house's silent routine. Daniel watched from a distance, trying to keep his logic intact, but the constancy of that animal was beginning to destabilize even the most rational thoughts. There was something unsettling about the way the cat persisted, not with the urgency of a hungry animal, but with the precision of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't beg. He didn't cry, he didn't seek affection. It just remained. always in front of the same window, always looking at the same point, the same room that Daniel had avoided opening for years. Doubts began to accumulate in silence. The mind searched for plausible explanations, but the heart, although hesitant, began to agitate with dormant memories. It was on one of these mornings, when facing the feline once again, that the memory emerged with frightening clarity. February 1996. Cobb's Hill Lake had frozen over that winter earlier than expected. Daniel, just 6 years old, had strayed from his parents during a walk and approached the shore, ignoring the warnings. The ice gave way beneath his small feet, and the body sank into the icy water. For years, the story was told with a loophole. He had been saved before firefighters arrived. But as a child, he repeated to his parents with frightening innocence that it was a white cat that had pulled his shirt to the edge. Everyone said it was the imagination of a traumatized child, until he himself stopped believing. Now, almost 3 decades later, the memory came back strongly, and that cat on the porch, with white fur stained with dirt and staring eyes, brought back something he had buried. Daniel wondered if it was a coincidence, if it was possible that the mind was just playing with him, but I couldn't take my attention away from what I felt. It was as if 2 distinct times were imperceptibly touching each other. The conflict began to grow from within. With each passing day, the doubt became deeper. Feed the cat or ignore it? Open the door and allow something inexplicable to happen? Or keep the logic intact, removing any chance of reconnection with the past? He tried to convince himself that he was just a lost animal, one of many, but something inside him refused to accept that explanation. During a rainy night, Daniel spent hours watching through the crack in the curtain. The cat remained in the same place, soaked, motionless, eyes shining in the streetlight. There was no fear there, no rush, just an insistent presence. A silent wait. That night, the sky over Rochester was overcast, and the city seemed even quieter than usual. An icy wind passed through the cracks in the house, as if whispering something old, something forgotten. Daniel remained for hours, looking out the window, undecided. The cat's eyes, fixed on the glass, seemed to not only wait, they seemed to invite. There was no longer the sound of claws, nor the insistent scratching of the previous days. Just stillness, as if time itself had stopped before that choice. In an unplanned gesture, he stood up. Bare feet touched the cold floor of the hallway. He walked slowly to the door. The hands hesitated for a second, but the doorknob turned. When the door opened, the night air rushed in, bringing with it the smell of wet earth and dry leaves. The cat, until then motionless, took a single step forward. There was no rush. He walked past Daniel with the ease of someone who already knew every corner of that house. He walked straight down the corridor without looking back. Its light pause made no sound, but its presence was heavy, charged with intention, without understanding. Why he allowed this, Daniel followed behind, observing the animal's every movement. The cat stopped in front of a closed door, the same one that was never opened, my old childhood bedroom. As if guided by something beyond reason, Daniel opened the door. The creaking of the hinge cut through the silence of the house like a lament. The cat entered and, for the first time, turned to face him directly. The look was deep, firm, but without aggression, just a silent invitation for him to cross that forgotten threshold. The room was filled with boxes, old toys, and furniture covered in sheets. The smell of stored things mixed with the faded perfume of childhood. The cat walked to one of the corners where a stack of boxes stood next to the wall. He climbed up quickly and sat down next to the last one, the dustiest one. Daniel approached, slowly. The fingers touched the old cardboard with some trepidation, as if opening that box meant opening something much bigger inside. When he removed the lid, the first thing he saw was a child's handkerchief, sloppily folded. It was yellowed, with age, and one corner had an irregular mark, as if it had been bitten. Next to it, among drawing paper and old figurines, rested something that made her skin crawl, a tuft of white hair stuck in an old adhesive tape, almost fossilized by time. The memory came back with a vengeance. The day at the lake, the fall, the feeling of being pulled by something that shouldn't be there, parents' screams, the dry blanket, the cat that no one found afterwards. Daniel's breathing quickened. The room seemed smaller. The air is denser. The cat was still there, motionless, watching him with unblinking eyes. It was as if time had bent, as if two versions of himself crossed paths at that exact moment. The version that drowned, and the version that needed to understand. The next morning the house seemed quieter than usual, as if waiting for something that was already underway to unfold. The cat had spent the night in the old room, lying in a corner where there had been a small shelf of toys. The light that entered through the cracks in the windows revealed the dust suspended in the air, and in the middle of it, the serene outline of the sleeping feline body. Daniel, still disturbed by the discovery of the scarf and hair, remained at the door for long minutes, watching. There was something different about the animal's posture. It wasn't just rest, it was delivery. It was belonging. As the hours passed, Daniel noticed details that had gone unnoticed. A slight old cut just above the cat's left hind paw. A thin scar, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably the same as the one his old childhood companion had. The memory came back clearly. An afternoon when his childhood cat had been injured while trying to protect him from a dog that had invaded the yard. The scar had remained there, marked forever. Now, so many years later, the same brand reappeared before his eyes. Time, which, until then, seemed like a straight line, began to curve. That night, sleep came faster. The mind, still in turmoil, finally surrendered to an exhaustion that was not just physical. During sleep, a memory unfolded as if experienced again. The lake, the sound of ice breaking, the impact of cold water on the child's body, the despair. And then the white figure. Not an abstract image, but a clear, defined one. The cat. The eyes steady, teeth holding the coat collar. The slow drag to the edge, breath returning, parents' screams in the distance, the rescue. For the first time, he didn't dream of anguish. I dreamed of salvation. When he woke up, he found the cat lying on the sofa, in the exact place where his father used to read in the afternoons. The animal looked up, as if it knew it had been recognized. Without rushing, he stretched his body and settled down once again, letting his head rest on the worn pillow. Daniel approached, slowly knelt in front of him and, with a restrained gesture, extended his hand. The cat didn't back down. Instead, he gently rested his head against his fingers, closing his eyes in calm surrender. It was a simple but profound gesture. It wasn't just a touch. It was a reunion, a restored link. The room remained silent for a few minutes, filled only by the distant sound of the wind outside. No words were said. None were necessary. There was an understanding that went beyond logic, that didn't need to be named. Just sense. Have you ever been saved by someone, even without realizing it at the time? Tell us here in the comments, because your testimony could become history here. As the days went by, the previously silent house began to gain new sounds. The front door now opened more frequently. The sound of a brush sliding across a canvas filled the room that, for years, had been filled with silence. The sun came through the open windows, breaking through washed curtains, revealing old dust that now danced freely in the air. The garden, previously covered in dry leaves and broken branches, began to be cleaned little by little. The shovel, the hoe, the bucket, instruments that had been stored in the basement since his parents' death, returned to Daniel's hands, now firm, determined. Inside the house, the cat occupied its space as if it had always belonged there. Sometimes he would lie down on the rug, sometimes he would sit in the armchair next to the fireplace. He wasn't invasive, nor was he needy, just present. His mere existence there filled gaps that Daniel didn't even know existed. It was undemanding company. It was silence that didn't weigh anything down. It was a living memory of what had been, forgotten in small actions, by serving food, by opening a door for the sun to come in, by smiling alone in front of a memory that used to hurt. Daniel was transforming, not abruptly, but continuously, like someone who slowly returns to the surface after being submerged for too long. The studio, abandoned since the early 20s, was once again used. The dried paints were replaced. Blank canvases no longer accumulate dust. The colors that came out of his brushes were not vibrant, but full of depth. Each stroke seemed to contain entire stories, pieces of past and hope diluted in thin layers of paint. It wasn't just about painting, but about rebuilding. To yourself, life, the house, the cat, in turn, never left. He didn't even approach the door. It was as if he knew that he belonged there, and that his mission, silent and ancient, was being fulfilled. Over time, neighbors began to notice the change. The curtains open. The music comes from the living room, the smell of fresh paint, the steps in the garden. No one knew for sure what had changed, but the change was visible, and it came from within. Sometimes, what is called coincidence is, in fact, time sewing together the loose threads of a story that had not yet ended. A second chance can come disguised as silence, with attentive eyes, with a rediscovered memory. What is lost often does not disappear. It just waits for the right moment to return, in the right place, in the most unexpected way. If this story touched your heart, comment below. Subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to believe again